Hey there, folks. Before we dive in, make sure to follow S News so you don't miss this story or any of our future coverage. If you want to support us, go ahead and subscribe, give us a like and drop a comment below. Your feedback really helps us grow and bring you more of the news that matters. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to follow S News to stay informed with our upcoming videos.
China's hypersonic missile simulation, a wake-up call for the U.S. Navy. At dawn in the South China Sea, China suddenly launched 12 ballistic missiles directly at a U.S. aircraft carrier group that was legally operating in international waters. This wasn't a drill, it was a simulation designed to reflect a very real danger that could erupt without warning. There was no declaration, no heads-up, just a wave of hypersonic warheads flying toward their targets at speeds no current defense system has ever faced in actual combat. Within minutes, the U.S. Navy's advantage was hanging by a thread. This forced top military leaders to ask some serious questions. Can the U.S. still control the seas if it takes the first hit from hypersonic weapons? And if China strikes without warning, can America even survive the first 10 minutes? Let's break it down. The war starts quietly, but then it happens fast. From deep inside China, 12 DF-26B ballistic missiles launch into the sky, targeting a U.S. carrier group patrolling the Philippine Sea. There's no diplomacy, no delays. Just a calculated, overwhelming first move meant to shock and cripple the U.S. These aren't your average missiles. The DF-26B, nicknamed the Carrier Killer, is one of China's most advanced anti-ship weapons. It travels at over Mach 10 and can hit moving targets hundreds of miles away. What makes it especially dangerous is its ability to dodge missile defenses and deliver a powerful warhead with near-pinpoint accuracy. It's not just a threat, it's a message. And that message is clear. China isn't planning to fight a long, drawn-out war. It wants to take out the U.S. Navy's power before the U.S. even gets a chance to respond. The primary target? The USS Ronald Reagan, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier and a key symbol of U.S. strength in Asia. If China's missiles can take out even one carrier, it would be a massive blow to U.S. credibility and its ability to protect allies in the region. China's missile strike simulation reveals a new military mindset. Use speed and surprise to throw off the enemy before the fight even begins. This is the essence of asymmetric warfare, not matching the U.S. ship for ship, but neutralizing its most powerful assets from a distance. And with only minutes between launch and impact, there's barely any time to react. The strike is both physical and psychological. A successful first hit would do more than sink ships. It would shake allies like Japan and the Philippines, proving that Beijing is willing to act decisively while Washington hesitates. That kind of message can shift alliances and weaken America's leadership in the Pacific. Even though this is just a simulation, the threat is real. Hypersonic weapons like the DF-26B are already in service, and global rivals are watching how the U.S. responds.
But the real shock came 2 minutes later, when the hypersonic storm pushed U.S. defenses to their limits. Sirens blared across the carrier group. American radar picked up 12 incoming DF-26B hypersonic missiles, each locked onto key U.S. warships. Within seconds, the Aegis combat system kicked in, firing SM-3 interceptors from nearby destroyers. 4 missiles were shot down, but 8 kept coming, deadly and undeterred. This moment revealed a painful truth. America's shield isn't bulletproof. Aegis, once considered the gold standard of naval defense, failed to stop most of the threat. Not because the crews weren't ready, but because the missiles were just too fast. Traveling over Mach 10, the DF-26Bs closed the distance faster than Aegis could calculate new targeting solutions. In a real war, that kind of failure isn't just about numbers. It's about lives, ships, and potentially the entire balance of power in the region. The U.S. Navy did what it could, but even its best wasn't enough. Aegis wasn't built for this kind of threat. Designed during the Cold War and upgraded over the years, it's great at intercepting predictable ballistic missiles, but hypersonic weapons like the DF-26 Bravo are anything but predictable. They twist, dive, and shift mid-flight. These warheads aren't just fast, they're smart. They combine speed and maneuverability to dodge radar locks and confuse interceptors. U.S. defense systems have to guess where the missile is going, and at Mach 10, even 1 second of hesitation is too long. Only 4 out of 12 missiles were taken down. That wasn't bad luck. It reflected a system that's overwhelmed by volume and outpaced by speed. This failure has serious implications for every U.S. warship that relies on Aegis to survive.
This wasn't just a missile test. It was a tactic. China didn't launch one missile at a time. It fired 12 almost simultaneously, forcing US systems to respond to multiple threats at once. This strategy is called saturation. The goal isn't just to hit, it's to overwhelm. And in this fictional scenario, it worked. 8 missiles got through. The DF-26 Bravo was chosen for good reason: fast, accurate, and mobile. It can be launched from within mainland China, putting US ships at risk without putting Chinese troops in harm's way. This shows a shift in how wars are fought. Instead of matching US ships with Chinese ships, China is exploiting America's weak spot: its slow reaction time. This is the danger of weak deterrence. When adversaries know you're unprepared, they plan to strike first and strike hard before you can respond. The failure wasn't just technical, it was political. Experts argue that the US fell behind in hypersonic defense because of weak leadership at the top. Under Trump, funding shifted away from future weapons and focused more on older systems like tanks and border walls. Meanwhile, China poured billions into next-gen missile tech.
Asian allies saw this coming. Japan, South Korea, and even Australia raised alarms about China's growing missile power. But under Trump's mixed signals and isolationist rhetoric, Washington delayed any serious response. Now that defense gap is a global problem.
Aegis, once central to the US strategy in the Pacific, now looks fragile. If US ships can't protect themselves, how can they protect Taiwan, the Philippines, or Japan? If China sees weakness, it won't back off. It'll push harder.
And just 3 minutes in, one of those unstoppable warheads showed exactly why it's called a carrier killer.
At 5:05 in the morning, the nightmare hit the USS Theodore Roosevelt. 2 DF-26 Bravo hypersonic missiles, traveling at over Mach 10, broke through America's top defenses and slammed into the flight deck of one of the Navy's most powerful aircraft carriers. One warhead hit near the forward fuel station, igniting a massive fireball. The second exploded near the aircraft maintenance area, scattering debris across the deck. 4 FA-18 Super Hornets were destroyed instantly, their fuel tanks exploding like bombs. The blast tore through the steel deck, disabled the catapult systems, and triggered the fire suppression system. Shrapnel damaged antenna systems, disrupting communications. The command center went dark. Smoke filled compartments. Alarms blared non-stop. The Roosevelt wasn't just damaged, it was paralyzed. This was the first direct missile hit on a US carrier in modern times. It didn't just destroy equipment, it shattered the illusion of invincibility. The enemy landed the first brutal punch. As flames engulfed the deck, the crew rushed into action. But this wasn't a drill. Fuel fires spread faster than expected, threatening to reach the ship's ammunition stores. Below deck, emergency teams sealed compartments, trapping 3 sailors inside. Above, smoke made visibility nearly impossible. Radios were down or silent. For 6 minutes, the Roosevelt had no clear contact with the rest of the fleet. Every second that passed raised the risk of a secondary explosion. Commanders had to choose between saving the ship or saving the crew. Some areas were evacuated completely to contain the fire. Others were flooded with foam, which stopped the blaze but disabled vital systems. This wasn't training. It was a real test of human endurance under impossible pressure. In those first moments, the real enemy wasn't just the missile, it was fear, confusion, and a ticking clock.
For decades, U.S. aircraft carriers symbolized global dominance. They could show up in foreign waters and change the conversation without firing a shot. But now, with flames rising and jets burning, the Roosevelt didn't look like a symbol of control. It looked vulnerable. Morale collapsed. Sailors questioned whether the ship's defenses could be trusted. Officers scrambled to regain control of a vessel built to lead. Even nearby support ships hesitated, unsure how much more firepower was inbound.
The fear wasn't just on board, it rippled across the Pacific. Allies like Japan, South Korea, and Australia watched closely. If the US can't protect its own fleet, how can it protect theirs? The Roosevelt didn't sink, but the myth of immunity did. One modern missile strike changed the entire conversation around power, defense, and the future of war. The real failure wasn't just on board, it was in Washington. Military experts have warned for years that hypersonic weapons like the DF-26 Bravo could bypass traditional missile defenses. Now that delay is costing lives. Aegis destroyers couldn't stop every missile. Carrier groups lacked the advanced defenses needed for this new era. While the Navy trained for cyber attacks, drone swarms and torpedo assaults, it wasn't fully ready for what hypersonic missiles could do in minutes. Now the US Navy's dominance in the Pacific is under question. The Roosevelt's survival was a tribute to the resilience of its crew, but the damage went far beyond fire and steel. It was about perception. Is American power still enough to lead in a world racing ahead? But while the crew fought to regain control, another wave of destruction was already coming. At 5:10 in the morning, just minutes after the DF-26 Bravos hit the Roosevelt, a second wave was launched, faster, lower, and harder to track.
From beyond U.S. defensive range, a group of Chinese H-6K bombers fired 16 YJ-12 cruise missiles. These weren't ballistic giants dropping from space. These were predators, flying just meters above the waves, hugging the ocean's curve, vanishing into the sea's chaos.
The YJ-12s flew at nearly Mach 3. They weren't just fast, they were unpredictable. Each missile zigzagged mid-flight, twisting through the air in sharp maneuvers, defying simple predictions. This wasn't an accident. It was built to overload Aegis systems and exploit milliseconds of hesitation.
Defensive radar struggled to track them all. By the time countermeasures activated, the missiles were already in the kill box. This wasn't just a second strike, it was the second punch in a well-practiced combo. China's strategy was clear: hit hard, then hit again before the bruises settle. Rhythm became a weapon, precision a tactic. On board the Roosevelt, chaos escalated. The air was thick with smoke. Fires still raged on the flight deck. Several FA-18s were already destroyed, their wreckage blocking launch paths. Damage control crews scrambled to clear debris. Fuel lines were ripped apart. Secondary fires flared up. CIWS systems spun to life, firing streams of tungsten rounds. Sea Sparrow missiles launched in all directions, but 16 fast, maneuvering cruise missiles were too much for a single ship. Nearby, Arleigh Burke-class destroyers fired SM-2 interceptors. Chaff was deployed to confuse missile guidance systems, but the sheer speed and scale of the attack revealed cracks in the Navy's layered defenses.
Even worse, signs pointed to advanced electronic warfare. Communications between ships were delayed. In real time, the Navy wasn't just under kinetic attack, it was under electronic and electromagnetic assault. This was a joint strike, a demonstration of China's evolving military doctrine.
By then, it was clear this wasn't just an attack on ships. It was an attack on momentum, unity, and initiative. The Roosevelt Strike Group was no longer leading the fight. It was reacting. And in war, reacting is a losing position.
With radar systems overworked and crews fighting fires on board, the group had no time to coordinate a counterstrike. More importantly, the attack exposed a harsh truth. America's reliance on Cold War-era doctrines and aging defenses is now a liability. Trump's administration redirected funds away from advanced missile defense and electronic warfare, despite growing threats in the Indo-Pacific. That negligence is now costing the US time and possibly lives. For 5 long minutes, the world's most powerful navy looked vulnerable. China didn't need to sink a carrier, it just had to disable one. And in doing so, it proved a terrifying point. Dominance doesn't require invasion anymore. It can be shattered from hundreds of miles away.
Even worse, signs pointed to advanced electronic warfare. Communications between ships were delayed.
In real time, the Navy wasn't just under kinetic attack, it was under electronic and electromagnetic assault. This was a joint strike, a demonstration of China's evolving military doctrine.
By then, it was clear. This wasn't just an attack on ships, it was an attack on momentum, unity, and initiative. The Roosevelt Strike Group was no longer leading the fight, it was reacting. And in war, reacting is a losing position. With radar systems overworked and crews fighting fires on board, the group had no time to coordinate a counterstrike. More importantly, the attack exposed a harsh truth. America's reliance on Cold War-era doctrines and aging defenses is now a liability. Trump's administration redirected funds away from advanced missile defense and electronic warfare, despite growing threats in the Indo-Pacific. That negligence is now costing the US time and possibly lives. For 5 long minutes, the world's most powerful navy looked vulnerable. China didn't need to sink a carrier, it just had to disable one. And in doing so, it proved a terrifying point. Dominance doesn't require invasion anymore. It can be shattered from hundreds of miles away.
By 5:15 a.m., the USS Roosevelt was in critical condition. The deck was still burning, communications were down, fighter jets destroyed, and more YJ-12 missiles were closing in. Defenses were nearly exhausted. Damage control teams were beyond fatigued. It seemed like the situation was slipping beyond recovery until help arrived from the west.
At 6 a.m., the USS Nimitz strike group appeared on radar. Within minutes, it launched NQ-25 Stingray drones to refuel the Roosevelt's remaining FA-18s mid-air. These drones gave the fighters extended flight time and maintained a defensive perimeter for a fleet running out of options. That aerial refueling brought precious time and air superiority. But fuel wasn't the only thing the Nimitz group brought.
Finally, thanks for listening and sticking with us through this episode. If you want to stay updated, don't forget to follow S News and check out our future videos. And hey, be sure to subscribe, like, and comment.